The flood was not meant to save the world. It was meant to erase something from it. Before the rain began, God made a decision so terrifying that an entire race would be left outside the ark with no second chance. And according to Scripture, their destruction had already been sealed. Most people think Noah built the ark to rescue humanity. But hidden inside the Genesis account is a darker truth. There were beings God never intended to preserve, beings tied to a corruption so deep that the earth itself became filled with violence. Genesis 6:2 says that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and took them as wives. From that forbidden union came the Nephilim. Genesis 6:4 calls them ancient heroes, famous men, but their legacy was fear, bloodshed, and rebellion against the divine order. As wickedness spread across the earth, humanity collapsed into moral chaos. Scripture says every imagination of man's heart was continually evil. Then God declared that the world would be judged by water. But one man remained different. Noah walked with God while the world around him embraced corruption. For years he built the ark under an open sky as warnings were ignored. And when the day finally came, the door of the ark closed forever on everyone left outside. But to understand why the door had to close, we must return to what happened before the flood. According to the ancient biblical account, the boundary between heaven and earth was broken. In the days of Noah, rebellion did not remain confined to mankind alone. Something else entered the story. Something that transformed the world into a place of escalating violence and spiritual ruin. Genesis 6:2 states that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and took them as wives. Many interpretations exist, but one of the oldest traditions claims these were fallen heavenly beings who abandoned their appointed order. They did not descend by accident. Their rebellion was deliberate. Jude 1-6 later describes angels who did not keep their positions of authority but abandoned their proper dwelling. From that forbidden union came the Nephilim. Genesis 6:4 calls them ancient heroes, famous men. Yet their reputation was not built on righteousness. Their presence became associated with fear, domination, and destruction. The earth began changing under their influence. Violence spread from generation to generation until corruption reached every layer of society. The danger of the Nephilim was not merely physical strength. The deeper threat was what followed wherever they ruled. Humanity slowly lost its moral foundation. Truth became distorted. Evil became normal. Genesis records that the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. What began as a single act of rebellion was now consuming the entire world. Ancient traditions surrounding this period also speak of forbidden knowledge spreading among mankind, warfare, bloodshed, destructive ambition, and pride without restraint. Whether viewed symbolically or literally, the message remains the same. Creation itself was collapsing under the weight of corruption. And as darkness expanded across the earth, one reality became impossible to ignore. The flood was no longer simply a warning. It was becoming inevitable. As that corruption spread across the earth, humanity moved further from the order God had established. Violence was no longer isolated acts of evil. It had become the language of the world itself. Genesis 6:5 declares that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The condition of mankind had reached a level Scripture describes as total moral collapse. Yet in the middle of that darkness, one man stood apart. While entire generations were consumed by rebellion, Noah remained faithful. Genesis says Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. In an age shaped by fear, corruption, and spiritual confusion, Noah refused to follow the path that surrounded him. That choice changed history. Noah was not powerful like the giants spoken of in ancient accounts. He was not a ruler, warrior, or king. But while the world ignored God, Noah listened. And because of that obedience, he became central to a plan that would preserve life itself. Then came the warning no generation had ever heard before. God revealed that judgment was approaching, not through war or famine, but through waters that would cover the earth. Genesis records the command clearly: make yourself an ark of cypress wood. What Noah was about to build was more than a vessel. It would become the dividing line between a corrupted world and the remnant chosen to survive it. And as the ark began to rise under an open sky, the world around Noah continued descending toward destruction, unaware that the moment of judgment was drawing closer with every passing day. After receiving the command, Noah obeyed immediately and began building the ark exactly as God had instructed. While the world around him descended deeper into corruption, he continued working in faith year after year. The ark stood as a warning that judgment was approaching, even as most people ignored it. Genesis 6:3 declares, "My spirit shall not always strive with man." Humanity had reached a breaking point. Violence covered the earth, and the corruption connected to the Nephilim continued spreading through society. Genesis 6:4 describes the Nephilim as ancient heroes, famous men, but their legacy became tied to fear, rebellion, and moral collapse. The flood was not only meant to destroy a violent world, it was meant to remove the corruption that had consumed it. The fallen beings connected to that rebellion had no place in the restored world God was preparing. Their transgression had been deliberate, and Scripture later speaks of angels who abandoned their appointed place and faced judgment. So while Noah kept building under an empty sky, another reality was quietly unfolding. The ark was becoming a line of separation between those who would survive the coming flood and those who never would. At last, the moment arrived. The animals entered the ark exactly as God had commanded, 2 of all flesh coming male and female. Noah, his wife, his sons, and their wives stepped inside as the sky above remained silent and unchanged. Then Genesis 7:16 records one of the most chilling moments in Scripture. "And the Lord shut him in. The door of the ark was not closed by Noah, but by God himself." In that instant, the opportunity to escape the coming judgment ended forever for everyone outside. And what happened after that moment became one of the most terrifying scenes ever described in Scripture. Stay with this story, because the mystery surrounding the Nephilim is far from over. The world that had mocked Noah suddenly stood defenseless before the flood. The corruption that had spread across the earth through violence and rebellion had reached its final hour. Rain began to fall. The fountains of the deep burst open, and waters rose with a force humanity had never witnessed before. Genesis 7:20 says the waters covered even the mountains by 15 cubits upward. No strength, power, or reputation could survive what was coming. Genesis 7:23 declares that every living thing outside the ark perished, while Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. The flood erased the corrupted world completely. And when the waters covered the earth, the age of the Nephilim came to an end. But the mystery of the Nephilim did not disappear with the flood. Centuries later, their name surfaced again in a way that shocked the people of Israel. When Moses sent 12 spies into the promised land, 10 of them returned, overwhelmed with fear. They reported seeing enormous warriors and claimed they were connected to the Nephilim of ancient times. Numbers 13:33 records their words. "We saw the Nephilim, and we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes before them." That single report spread panic through the entire camp of Israel. The people who had witnessed miracles in Egypt suddenly doubted they could survive what waited ahead. Fear became stronger than faith. But 2 men refused to surrender to terror. Joshua and Caleb believed that no giant could stand against the will of God. While the others saw defeat, they saw a test of faith. Yet the nation listened to fear instead of conviction. Because of that unbelief, the generation that left Egypt wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Only Joshua and Caleb eventually entered the promised land. Even long after the flood, the memory of the Nephilim still carried enormous psychological power. Their legacy was not only about physical size, but about the fear and despair their name continued to create wherever it was remembered. This is why the Nephilim were more than mysterious giants in ancient stories. In the biblical narrative, they became a symbol of corruption spreading through the world. Their name appears only twice in Scripture, in Genesis 6-4 and Numbers 13:33. Yet both appearances are connected to fear, judgment, and spiritual collapse. In Genesis, the rise of the Nephilim is linked to the flood that nearly erased humanity. In Numbers, even the memory of them was enough to shake an entire nation with fear. Their presence in Scripture always marks a moment when humanity stands dangerously close to destruction. For centuries, scholars have debated who the Nephilim truly were. Some believe the sons of God in Genesis were fallen heavenly beings. Others argue they were descendants of Seth, who abandoned the righteous path. But regardless of interpretation, the warning inside the story remains the same. When humanity rebels against divine order, corruption spreads rapidly. That is why Noah's Ark represented far more than survival. The Ark became a boundary between the old world and the new one. For years, Noah built it while the world still had time to turn back. But eventually that period of mercy ended, and the flood arrived as judgment against a civilization consumed by violence. Yet even after the waters receded, one truth remained clear. Evil did not vanish forever with the Nephilim. The flood removed corruption from the earth, but the human heart still carried the ability to choose darkness or obedience. And that struggle would continue long after Noah stepped out of the ark. Yet after everything the flood revealed, the story of Noah is not only about judgment. At its core, it is about choice. In a world overwhelmed by corruption, Noah chose obedience while nearly everyone around him followed a different path. That decision made him the bridge between the world that perished in the flood and the world that came after it. The ark was never just a structure built to survive rising waters. It became a symbol that even in the darkest generation, there is still a path for those willing to walk with God. While the Nephilim and the rebellious forces behind them believed their power placed them beyond consequences, the flood revealed how fragile that power truly was. No strength built on violence or rebellion could stand against the Creator's judgment. The same world that once seemed untouchable vanished beneath the waters. And through it all, Noah learned that faith is not passive belief. Faith is continuing to build, continue to obey, and continue to stand firm, even when the entire world moves in the opposite direction. That is why Noah's story continues to endure. It reminds every generation that darkness may spread across the earth, but the choice between corruption and righteousness still belongs to each person. When the floodwaters finally retreated and the ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat, the world entered a new beginning. Noah stepped out with his family and the surviving creatures of the earth, leaving behind a world that had vanished beneath the waters. One of his first actions was to build an altar before God, marking the start of humanity's new chapter after the flood. Genesis records that God established a covenant with Noah and placed a rainbow in the sky as its sign. The promise was clear. Never again would a flood destroy all life upon the earth. The rainbow became more than a symbol of mercy. It stood as a reminder that Noah had remained faithful while the world around him collapsed into corruption. For the first time in generations, the earth seemed free from the domination and fear once associated with the Nephilim. Yet even after the flood, difficult questions remained. Why had corruption spread so far? And why does the story of the Nephilim continue to echo through biblical history centuries later? Those questions would keep scholars, theologians, and readers searching for answers long after Noah's generation had passed away. One question has continued to trouble readers for centuries. If the Nephilim did not choose how they were born, was it just for them to be excluded from the ark? The Bible never gives a simple answer. Instead, it presents a world where the consequences of rebellion spread far beyond the original act itself. According to the ancient narrative, the fallen beings who crossed the boundary between heaven and earth acted by choice. Their transgression altered the world around them, and the flood became the final judgment upon that corruption. The waters closed over the old world with no return, ending an era defined by violence, fear, and rebellion against divine order. But out of that destruction, Noah emerged as the symbol of a different path. Surrounded by chaos, he chose obedience when almost everyone else turned away. That decision preserved not only his family, but the future of humanity itself. The story of the flood endures not simply because of its scale, but because it centers on the power of human choice. Noah walked faithfully while the world collapsed around him, and through that faithfulness, a new beginning became possible. The Nephilim vanished beneath the floodwaters. The rebellious forces tied to them faced judgment, and Noah became the beginning of the renewed world that followed after the storm. In the end, the story of Noah and the Nephilim is really a story about choice. Every generation faces its own form of corruption, its own forces capable of pulling humanity away from truth and righteousness. And in every generation, there are still people called to stand firm when the world around them refuses to. The real question was never whether the Nephilim possessed power. According to the ancient accounts, they clearly did. The question is whether anyone would choose faithfulness in the middle of chaos, the same way Noah did while the world around him collapsed into violence and rebellion. When the ark's door closed, an entire age came to an end. The flood became the dividing line between a corrupted world and a restored one. What happened in Noah's generation was not presented as random destruction, but as judgment against a world that had abandoned divine order completely. Yet the flood also carried a message of hope. Noah's obedience preserved the future when everything else seemed lost. For years, he continued building the ark while others ignored the warnings, believing nothing could ever change their world. But the waters eventually proved that no kingdom, no giant, and no human power stands above the justice of the Creator. After the flood, Noah released a dove from the ark, and it returned carrying an olive leaf, the sign that the waters had receded and life could begin again. The old world had passed away. A new chapter for humanity had begun. That is why the story still endures. Not simply because of the flood or the mystery of the Nephilim, but because it forces every generation to ask the same question. When corruption spreads and truth becomes difficult to follow, will we choose the path of Noah or the path that led the old world to destruction? If this story made you look at the days of Noah differently, there are even deeper mysteries in Scripture still waiting to be uncovered. Stay connected for the next exploration.